Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Lad's family, I welcome you all to this celebration of life. I am Leslie Leaney. I'm connected to Lad and his family as the founding trustee of this museum, co-founder of the Historical Diving Society USA, and the founder and publisher of the Journal of Diving History. The simple fact that you've all received an invitation indicates that Lad was an important figure in your life, and this evening we all gather to share our memories of Lad in our lives. To start this evening's celebration, the family wishes to share this light-hearted video of Lad's life that was compiled by his friend Phil Newton for Lad's induction into the Academy of Underwater Arts and Sciences. Okay, Drake. I first met Lad 30 years ago last Tuesday at the 1992 inaugural meeting of the Historical Diving Society at City College. I'd just arrived in town as a refugee from the Hollywood music industry, so there wasn't really much connection between Lad and I. He got to know me a little better as the Historical Diving Society grew, and more of my articles and publications gained attention in the diving industry. At that time, he lived in an apartment up on the 1500 block of State Street above Bill's Coffee Shop. A little later in 1997, the Austrian diving pioneer Professor Hans Haas, the pioneer of pioneers of diving, invited me to become his partner. Hans had entered the sea in 1937 and is internationally recognized for making the first series of scuba dives of the new diving era in 1942, 1 year before Cousteau and Gagnon developed the aqualung. At this time, Hans was 78 years old and he had been off the world stage for several decades, but inside the recreational and scientific diving industries, he was still revered by the first generation of divers. Working with my great friend Ed Stetson, who's with us tonight, I got Hans to agree to come back to America for a film festival in his honor. Ernie, Brooks, and Ed secured the 2,000-seat Arlington Theatre for the event, and the cast of A-list divers instantly agreed to be on our program, and we sold the Arlington out. The return of Hans Haas and his charming wife Lottie to the USA was a very big deal indeed, and I wanted to host a welcoming dinner for them. By this time, Lad had built the Lad Pad up on TV Hill, which I thought would be an ideal location to host such a dinner. Lad had never heard of Hans Haas, who to him was just some foreign scuba diver, not a real diver like our abalone divers and oilfield divers, but he had enough faith in me that he agreed to host the welcoming dinner. Both Lad's welcoming dinner and the film festival were huge successes. A movie crew from Germany had flown over to cover the film festival, and they later released the movie Hans Haas, the Man Who Discovered the Oceans. Dr. Sylvia Earle from National Geographic and local guy Ernie Brooks were all featured in scenes shot at the Lad Pad, and Lad was very happy to see his home had received some Hollywood-like attention. After the festival was over, Lad told me that he was truly amazed at what Hans had accomplished in his career, and it was his honor to have hosted him. In fact, he was a real diver. And from that time out, Lad's friendship with me became much closer. It seemed that I had proved my worth as a friend, cleared all of his diving phobias and hurdles, and he trusted me. We spoke about our backgrounds in New York, and Phil would reference some of that, and mine in East London. But we had both been raised in poor circumstances and were both in gangs. His stories always seemed a lot tougher than mine. But I recall that one thing I had experienced that he could not top was that I had been so poor that one day I went to school wearing girls' clothes. And as I already had a girl's name, he liked hearing that story an awful lot. Tell me the one about when you had to go to school. Okay. As the HDS grew, he hosted our board meetings at the Lad Pad. Several divers from overseas visited me here in Santa Barbara, and I would take them up to the Lad Pad so Lad could meet them. Being raised as a New York street guy, he was very happy to host Royal Navy Surgeon Vice Admiral Sir John Rawlins from England, and for Japan, Professor Ichiro Nishimoto, who came with his own posse and from his own institute in Japan. Sir John had often been a guest of the Queen of Buckingham Palace, and Ichi, as Ichiro was nicknamed, Ichi, as a professor, was not a stranger to the Emperor's Palace in Japan. These were just two of the internationally distinguished divers who came away with a great appreciation of the lad pad and his view, but maybe not so much the hospitality level, as lad's $2 chuck was a little different from the palates, the wine that they status usually enjoyed in other locations. A few years later, Lad offered to host my marriage to my wife Jill on July 16th, 2000, and we became the first couple married at the Lad Pad. As this new century moved on, I started to spend more personal time with him, surviving his unique parking and driving skills around the town. As terrifying as those experiences were, worse was to come when I volunteered to drive him down to San Pedro in his van for a memorial service to his friend, Captain Don Keach. Don was the captain of the submersible Trieste, which located the wreckage of the USS Thresher among his other career distinctions. Lad's van had a steering wheel that tilted almost horizontally. Instead of this, it was like this. So it's kind of like driving an old-fashioned London bus more than a modern car. Now, I'd driven all over the world in all sorts of conditions, but this proved to be the worst driving experience of my life. As Lad, strapped into his wheelchair, which was anchored to the floor, commenced to backseat drive me for what seemed like every half mile. Speed up. You're going too slow. Watch that white truck. Move over to the left lane. Slow down. You're going too fast. Catch up with the guy in front. Check your mirror. There's a semi behind us. Speed up. Where are we? What time will we get there? Slow down. You're going too fast. Is it that it's all on the wrong side of you? What's the matter with you? Where'd you learn to drive? Walmart? That's like from here to Montecito. And in the LA traffic, it got worse. I was never in the right lane and never at the right speed. It was a nightmare drive which took some time for me to fully recover from. But our biggest adventure came in 2018 when he arrived in the Bahamas with Jimmy and Sergio to meet myself and Krov Menuhin for a dive with Patrick Leahy on one of Patrick's Triton submersibles. We called the adventure Lad's Mission Impossible, from the top of TV Hill to the depths of the Bahamas. And you saw a little bit of the end of Phil's video there. And it also made the cover of the Montecito Journal. So maybe Sergio will mention a bit about it when he comes up here to speak. In remembering Lad, it would be remiss if I did not give him credit for being the best liar I had ever met. Not the biggest. My decades in Hollywood had provided all the champions I needed for the biggest. No, Lad was simply the best liar I'd ever met. And some of you here may have been involved in the example which I will share with you now. Early on in our friendship, he had decided to bestow the title of an English lord on me, and I became known as Lord Leslie to the team up at the Lad Pad. He used he used the term expansively with terms of endearment such as Lord Leslie, Lord Leslie, you're a lot dumber when you look. And other encouraging things. So I sort of took that, always looking on the bright side, I took that as a positive comment about my wardrobe and my standard of dress. But there was this time when he had constant group meetings up there, the Boys and Girls Club, Board of Directors and others, and I would sometimes have to go up there to deliver things to him, or I was meeting with Paddy or something, and he would always call me in to the main room where the meeting was being held. And slow to catch on, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And so I would walk into and say, Lord Leslie, come in. And so I'd walk in, and people would sort of stand up. And I just thought it was like they're being polite, a stranger walked into the room. Okay, and so that happened a couple of times, and I thought, well, it's like strange. There's a lot of strange things happened up the lad pen when I was up there. So, anyway, I sort of never thought much of it until one night on a Sunday, I went down to the James Joyce pub on State Street for the Irish music night. And as I walked into the bar, I walked up to the bar on a corner, there was a bunch of people sitting on bar stools, it was pretty packed. As I walked up to the bar, every one of these stools, like 6 people got up and sort of started. Oh, Lord, Leslie. Yeah, hi, Leslie. What's going on here? What's getting up and stuff? And so what happens is he had told them that I was a real English lord. And you know how he could sell you because he's you have to shut up and listen to what he's saying. So he's really an English lord. And when he comes in there, what you got to do is you got to stand up and you don't speak first. You let Lord Leslie speak first. That's how it is in the royal family. And so I never spoke. If I never spoke to these people, I just sort of said, no one ever spoke to me, and they were sitting up and bowing, and girls at skirts and stuff. So in the end, I get it out of these people. I said, "What's it all about?" He said, "Well, we know that you're actually like an eccentric lord, and that you won't." I said, "Oh, that's he just lying through his teeth again." No, I'm just like an ordinary guy. He said, "Well, he said you'd deny it. He warned us. He warned us that you would deny being a lord." It took me a little bit of time to convince these people that no, I'm just Leslie. He's setting you lot up and a lot of problems for me. Anyway, I know that there are probably going to be similar lad stories out there tonight. That's just one of mine. And so now I would like to invite my friend and lad's spouse, Linda, also known as the Goddess, to the podium to share some of her thoughts with you. Linda, please.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming tonight, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of reading myself, and don't want to forget anything. You've shown Lad love and appreciation, and I don't have to explain to anyone in the room here how we all feel about Lad. Everyone knows he's the greatest man on earth, and to me, he was the most courageous man that I have ever known. Not just brave, but courageous, strong, inspiring, and may I add, adventurous. It took only one meeting to know and that you will remember Lad forever. That's what happened to me. But that story's coming. First, I want to bring something to your attention. All of you have probably seen the posters. I think that they're out. If they aren't, they will be. That talked about the things that Lad did after he broke his neck. Are those posters out? Okay, well, if you take a look at all those posters, you'll see that he was in had a lot of projects after he broke his neck. Well, a few weeks ago, I spoke to the Cottage Hospital Rehabilitation Foundation, and I had these poster with me, and to show them what life was for Lad as a result of the dedicated men and women at the rehab facility who saw that Lad never gave up, but got stronger and better and ready to face the outside world. Rehab, yes, saved his life, but everything after that is on that poster. And it's because he was able to not just have a life, but to live the life he wanted. He had dreams to fulfill, he had places to go, he had people he wanted to meet, and every one of those items on that poster became a reality because of the support that he got once he came out into the world. He found that there was one person that provided everything he needed: support, encouragement, wise advice, counsel, someone to guide him back and get him on track when he needed that, and certainly a cheerleader for 25 years while raising 3 children and building a new life with a new love and pursuing their own dreams. And this is a person many of you have never met, but you've probably talked to on the phone. I could not celebrate Lad's life without celebrating Patricia Putnam. The person, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Is a one-woman dynamo who is Lad's wind beneath his wings and the den mother of all of us whose lives centered around Lad's pad. So here, some of you have only talked to her on the phone, have never seen her. So here is the voice, ladies and gentlemen. Patty, please stand up and turn around so everyone can see who's behind the voice. And I've got Lad's horn, one of them, and I think, Steve, you've got the other horn, don't you?
Sure.
Okay, well, I think it's time to blow the horn. That is what Lad would want to have happen. And I ask everybody, honk, 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 and please stand in honor of Patty. Thank you. Please stand, everybody. Thank you so much, and you've made Lad very, very happy, and me too. I want to tell you, I've broken this down into 3 different categories. So one is where I first met Lad, and then how lives progressed, and then what it was like to live with Lad. And then finally, well, I guess that was the second one, and then the final portion is what kind of a person Lad is. So I'm going to start with how I first met Lad. And this is a story that it's kind of hard to tell. It was almost 40 years ago. For those of you who may not know this, I didn't meet Lad just recently. I met him 40 years ago at the Hotel Biltmore. We picked each other up at the hotel, I admit that, and Lori was with him. They were supposed to meet for breakfast, but she missed him, then he missed her. Then they both got together in one spot and discussed whose fault it was, and I came to learn that this is standard in this family, about missing each other and part of the fun that they'd had. And I'm sitting there in the lobby with a strange job because a concierge position did not exist at that time, so it was new to Marriott, and I sat there as Lady Biltmore. And I listened to this conversation, and when they calmed down, I was about to do what my job required. I was supposed to take care of the guests, and taking them to breakfast, lunch, getting them a drink, whatever it took to keep the peace. And they were thinking the same thing, so they said, they asked me to have breakfast with them, so we did. And then after breakfast, Lad asked if he could reciprocate and he could take me to dinner that night. And I answered like the good Midwestern girl that I am, although my mother didn't really even know I was working in a hotel. She wouldn't have liked it. But there I was, so I said, thank you so much, but I don't go out with hotel guests. However, if you will come back and stay at a different hotel, I might consider it. I figured that took care of it. I didn't know Lad, okay? He then explained the hotel would vouch for him. He's Laddie Handelman, he lives down the beach, at what time should he pick me up? That should have told me a lot. He did get a good recommendation, by the way, from the hotel, and so I trusted that, and I gave him my phone number and my address, and we had a very nice dinner, and then he wanted to show me something, he said. And so we drove up what seemed like a very long ride, and as we rode up, it seemed going into a mountain. It got darker and darker and darker, and then finally we stopped, and there was an area overgrown with weeds and everything else, no lights, pitch black, and I was sure he was a axe murderer. And boy, would my mother ever be angry, because I should know better than to go out on a first date with somebody. And it wasn't even a date, it was just a reciprocal for my taking them for breakfast. But He opened the door, and I got out and followed him because he at least knew where there was a road, a small path anyway, and he found the path, so I figured it was safer to follow him than to try to escape into the weeds, and who knows where I'd end up. Not knowing KEYT was right down the street. So I was waiting for the axe to come down, and he just took my hand and he said, I want you to look at this view. And I tried to look at the view, although I was thinking other things. I was scared, I have to admit. He said to me he owned the property and he was going to build a house there someday. All I wanted to do was go home. I didn't know if I was going to make it home alive. I did not know that 25 years later, I would be sleeping in a bed in that very spot where we stood that night. And that began our friendship. Yes, I did fall in love with him. I knew, but I never told him because I was young. I had plans to go to law school, become an attorney. I wanted to buy a house. And he sounded like he was very busy for an abalone diver. So there were times when he stopped by to see me and say hello. And there were times when, as time progressed, he was available. He said he's single, but I was not, or I was single and he was not, or he was going out of the country. He was doing something else with his business, and he had a girlfriend. Anyway, timing is everything, and the timing just never was right. But we stayed friends, and I did graduate from law school, and I did buy my house on Eucalyptus Hill. And I did do legal work for him when he asked, and I tried to help him out if I could, especially when he started to collect these girlfriends. That's the nice thing, though. He told me about the girls and why they were suing him, or he was going to have to sue them. The one who had the house had the sign "Mi casa e su casa." She said he put that on, and so I own half the beach house. So those are the kinds of things that he would come up with and ask for my help. The nice thing is that in hearing about the stories about all of the various girlfriends he had, and this was later when he had already broken his neck, I came to find I heard all his lines. So when he got me, he had to get all new material. Because I could say, oh, I heard you say that to so-and-so. I remember putting that in the deposition. So after on August 1st, 2002, I was settled as an attorney in the county. I bought my house. I called the house and said I wanted to talk to Patty, as we all talk to Patty, and I checked in to see if Lad would mind if I stopped by. And I went to the door. He was waiting. I came in and I just said these words, "I'm available. Are you available?" And he said, laughing, "I'm available. Get in here." And that was it. And I've been there ever since. So that's how we met. Life with Lad. Now, let me tell you a little bit about that. It was easy. The fact that he's in a wheelchair made no difference whatsoever. I never saw the wheelchair because I knew him when he was walking. So for me, it just didn't exist. But as for day-to-day maintenance and times when he needed a caregiver for some help, he didn't want me doing anything. But I insisted on learning everything because the caregiver wasn't always there, or even if the caregiver was there, why wake them up at night when I could help out? And so one of the things that happened was I got my own toolkit so I could fix the wheelchair when we were out, when something fell off, and something often did fall off, usually the arm. And then I also received from Christine Ebner a very nice birthday present. She's a nurse. I got a stethoscope, my own stethoscope, so I can listen to his lungs because he was subject to getting pneumonia. And so I thought I was pretty well equipped, but one night we were at the Arlington, and he had a problem with the catheter. I'm sorry, Lad, but I'm going to tell this. He had a problem with the catheter, and so we had a choice, men's room or women's room. He wanted the women's room. I said, no way unless you were blind and had sunglasses. So we didn't do that. We went into the men's room. We got a big booth. And so we got in there, and he was uncomfortable. He was embarrassed. This is one of the first times, and this had happened since I just started our relationship. And I knew I had to take care of this problem because the catheter was clogged. And I walked behind him, and he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, just wait a minute, I'll be right there. I stood around behind him, and he said, I can't imagine what you're doing. Then I moved around so he could see me, and I stood before him absolutely naked. And I said, now who's uncomfortable? He laughed as hard as I'd ever heard laugh. And from then on, when he needed help, there was no problem allowing me to help him. And what we would do is if he needed a washcloth or if he needed a pullback or whatever it is, they all were assigned kisses, number of kisses, 3 kisses for the washcloth and 4 kisses for the pullback and all of that. And I made him realize this was a win-win and that I was intending to collect before we went to sleep. So it made it much more comfortable for both of us. And so you could see how we would have fun when some couples that might not have been able to happen, but because we were both a little bit immature and ridiculous, we were able to do that. I could tell you about the time that he took me to Michael Jackson's father's birthday party at Neverland, and he wanted to see the gorillas. And so I found the gorillas. I said, here they are, lad, come follow me. Here, I found them. And suddenly he took off in the wrong direction. And I'm yelling, Laddie, Laddie, the gorillas are here, the gorillas are here. And then I saw a very blonde woman with lots of real red lipstick. And she was going down the hill, she was down at the bottom of the hill, Lad was going on one side, and I saw from where I was, another man was coming from the other side. And the other man beat Lad, because he had to slow down in the wheelchair. And he always said that I was yelling at him to come look at the gorillas. Here he was about to meet Gwen Stefani. So I ruined that for him. My favorite medical story, well, that's when Lad was on life support in intensive care. He'd been on that for a week, and the doctor said there was no hope. He probably wouldn't survive. I spent the night, as I often did, and he had, in fact, a very horrible night full of nightmares. And when he awoke in the morning, they checked his lungs, and the one lung miraculously cleared, and the other one was much better. So Dr. Kupperman came to the hospital, and he had the tubes removed, because up until that time, Lad had these tubes down his throat, and he couldn't talk. And while they removed them, I whispered in his ear, Lad, you know, they saved your life. Think about what you're going to say, what your first words are going to be when they take everything off, and what you want to say to Dr. Kupperman and his assistant, because he almost died. And Lad said, Womf. And then again he said, Womf. The doctor said, what's Womf? Lad just got this smile on his face, and he nodded to me, you know, as if you tell them. And I didn't want to tell them. But the silence was so unbearable, I finally said, well, Dr. Kupperman, the W and the O stand for watch out. And Dr. Kupperman, I can't say in full what the M and the F stand for. But the first word is mother. That was Lad. He almost died hours before, and now he's ready to conquer the world. I want to tell you one more story, because this is one of them that he was especially proud of. He'd always told me my competition, my only competition, was Shania Twain. We were going to Las Vegas, and she was going to be there at Caesar's, at the Forum there at Caesar's Palace. And so we got tickets to go. And from then on until the day we left, he talked about Shania, Shania, Shania. He was playing music and saying how nice she was and how glad she's going to be to see him. And we all know, you know, he's about 4 times her age, and she's, or 3 times, sorry, but whatever his age is, and none of us really know, but He definitely didn't know Shania Twain. Anyway, so we were there, and we were sitting in the downstairs, the first floor, and it's huge, it's like a big football field. And Shania is on the stage, she's singing away. Then she goes way over to the far, far left. She goes down some stairs from the stage, and she walks over, and at that point when she walks over, we're way over on the other side, but she's equal with us. She's right across from us, but way, way across. She looks down at our aisle. She looks straight at Ladd. Then she ran, singing all the way to Ladd and jumped in his lap. It's true. It's true. She was whispering and laughing, and he was whispering and laughing in her ear. Then she jumped up and she looked at me, kept singing, laughing, and then she ran back up on stage, and I just sat there too shocked to even get my camera on. And I asked Vlad, what did you say to her? And he said, I asked him that, and he said, I told her I waited for her as long as I could, and I'm sorry, but I'm taken now. And what did she say? She said, that's all right, I understand. You think that would be enough? Because he always liked to do things like that to me. Just take me by surprise and, really put me on. No, that wasn't enough. We got back to the hotel where we were staying, and he said, she does know where I was staying. I mentioned it. And I said, oh, great. So we got up there to the suite. It was one bedroom. And from the minute I opened the door, there were not rose petals, but the tops of roses. I don't know how many hundreds of them, but they were everywhere. They were the kitchen, on the tables, on the sofas, around in the bathtub, they were in our bed. And then there was a dressing table there, my dressing table, and there were roses there. And an unsigned note that said, love is like a song between two people. That's how far Ladd would go to get me off guard and surprise me. So, having said that, what kind of a man is Ladd? Well, he was romantic, he was thoughtful, he was kind, he could be funny. He never spoke harshly to me. He loved people, everyone, men, women of every age, children. He enjoyed doing good deeds for others anonymously, always anonymously. And when you see anonymous on a donation, chances are I knew it was Ladd. And he always made me feel loved. And isn't that all we all really want, is to have a nice person who makes us feel loved? It seems like a very simple prescription, but it's not always easy to find. I knew I could always support myself and a spouse. I had a very generous family, and so what the man didn't matter. It was who he was and his character. And here comes what made me fall in love with Ladd. We shared a poem. I didn't know it initially, but I found out the poem I was carrying since I was 19 years old was the same poem that he used in his work and with his employees and with our caregivers. And it's a poem by Rudyard Kipling, and it's called If. And you may not know it by that name, but it starts out, if you can, I think I have it here, if you can keep you can keep your face when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And the poem goes on to talk about the kinds of, what is the character for a man. Here it is. If you can keep your head when all about you is losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or talk too wise. The poem, from the beginning to end, defines the qualities that I valued in the character of the person that I wanted to be with. Lad strove to live a life consistent with this poem. At the end it says, if you can fill the unforgiving minutes with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. And Lad fulfilled that. That was how he lived. And that's why I say, he is my hero. I never met anyone like him, and I don't think I ever will. And that's why I fell in love with him. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Heartfully said. Sergio, come on, please.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and read as well. Hello, my name is Sergio, also known as Gio. I am one of many gladiators. It is an honor to be here today and share a little bit about that. Lad and Linda hired me in 2008. I was a lost 20-year-old kid that thought he knew everything, but really knew nothing. But just like many Lad stories, Lad saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Lad and I clicked right off the bat. At least I think we did. But man, he tested me by throwing curveballs and seeing if I could figure things out. Lad would set some goals, some time goals of how long he thought everything should take, from jumping on the roof and checking a leak, to disassembling a wheelchair and cooking eggs. Everything on his watch was 3 to 5 minutes max. I loved cooking for Lad, but I loved cooking with him the most. Lad's way of teaching how to cook was different, but very successful. Cooking salmon in 5 different ways was one of my favorite, but my most favorite was cooking salmon with the Ziploc full of water in the microwave. Man, those are good. Throughout the years, Lad and I shared some really awesome moments on multiple trips. New York, Bahamas, Texas, Oklahoma, Nevada, just to name a few. Every trip started with Willie Nelson's On the Road Again and ended with the good monkey and crocodile joke. A lot of you might know. But let's not forget, I had one rule for Lad and Linda. I would not go unless him and I had at least one day to get in trouble. Wait, I read that wrong. No, it does say get in trouble. But I really meant have some boy time. Let's see, there are a couple stories I'd like to share with you all. The first being one that stands out the most for me, New York. Lad and I took a trip to New York for a reunion with his childhood friends, the Red Devils, which, while in New York, Lad and I visited and reconnected with his old stomping grounds, the Boys and Girls Club, apartment complex where he grew up, and many other hangout spots. The Red Devils reunion was one to remember. It was held in the back of the Lincoln Lounge in Mount Vernon, where I met Lad's Italian gang buddies with Red Devil tattoos. It only took a few minutes until they all looked at me and welcomed me to be the newest member of the Red Devil. Oh yeah. But as I said before, I didn't travel anywhere without adding some time to get into trouble. But this time it lasted a few days with very minimal sleep. Lad had a way of being very convincing with his words. This time was, we can sleep next week. One of the nights, Lad and I found a very long street with tons of pizza parlors. And that's where we started our journey to find New York's best pizza. We started our mission with pizza, but ended our mission watching the sunset while waiting for Dunkin' Donuts to open their doors. That night we conquered New York. By the end of the trip, The only pair of shoes that I had taken had worn out soles. I could almost see my socks through. Lad and I had such a good time. And just like two dudes, we laughed at how many times we took risks when I would hold open the subway doors, and Lad would wind up, pick up enough speed to jump 6-inch gaps between the platform and the subway car. I'm glad we made it back home, because Linda always told me, don't come back without me. It is very true what they say. The best times in life are usually random, unplanned, completely spontaneous. Well, this trip was just that. Lad one day received a phone call from Patrick about heading over to the Bahamas to drive or to test drive a submersible. I don't remember exactly how Lad presented the idea to me, but I remember saying yes before he could even finish. Man, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All I knew was Lad and I were about to play some Willie Nelson and hit the road again. With multiple Jack and Cokes, connecting flights, and no wheelchair accessible vans available on the island, we made it to our destination where we met with Jim Handelman. This whole trip was special, not only for Lad, but for me, because I've never seen Lad so connected with his whole surroundings. From Patrick's wife singing before we entered the submersible, to touching down on the ocean floor at 2,750 feet. Lad was pretty quiet and took it all in. But let me rewind just a little bit. Lad had striking again. This is my first time doing this. I remember touching the bottom of the ocean floor and realizing where I was and what I was doing when Patrick asked me to take over the controls. Scary. It was like waking up from a dream. I finally thought, wait, I made it this far underwater, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I barely even know how to swim. That had a way of making me feel safe, sure, and secure from the start. That I never even realized where we were in the Bahamas, that we were in the Bahamas until that moment. The journey on the submersible could only be described by taking a trip to another world. Patrick, thank you so much for sharing this moment with us and taking such good care of us. The moment we got off the submersible, Lord Leslie approached me and told me, now you're the world's deepest Mexican. It took me a while to process the depth of what that meant. But soon after, I felt proud and good. But that only lasted a few hours, because the next day, Jim and I were snorkeling in 3 to 4 feet of water. And I was almost drowning because my snorkel was sucking in water. Lad could not stop laughing and gave me a hard time. How could the world's deepest Mexican be drowning in 3 feet of water? Now, I do want to take this moment and say thank you to all healthcare, everybody, all doctors, all hospitals, all family, all caregivers. Thank you so much for being part of our journey. I had lost my dad shortly before being hired at Lab, but I am so blessed I met Lab because he taught me, the adult me, a lot of life lessons. To keep an attorney close, you just happen to love and marry him. Work hard, never give up. Hogs get burned. Focus on happiness, stop and soar every moment. And lastly, how to always pay it forward and take a chance on someone to change their life. Yeah. Lad, Linda, Jim, Lori, Roy, Mama Pat, gladiators and friends, it has been a pleasure to be a part of this journey.
thought we weren't going to talk about that. Next, I'd like to invite to the podium CoLab Executive Director and radio talk show host, Andy Caldwell.
Well, I'll tell you, just being here is an honor, and being able to speak to you as such a great man is just literally one of the highlights of my life. Lad was one of the highlights of my life. I've always been a great admirer and defender of the American dream. That anybody in this world, in this nation we live in, could rise to the heights of their profession and success. If they were entrepreneurial, they were risk takers, if they knew how to work hard. And Lad is the epitome of that. And that's one of the reasons I loved him, is for what he represented. I've never met anybody like him, and I'm sure none of you have either. So I really got to know Lad because I write for the news press and had the radio show, and I was involved, the oil industry as part of our coalition, so I got to know him through that. And then he offered Lad's pad as an auction item for CoLab pretty much every year. So every year we'd have a Lad's pad auction item, and me and my kids were the slave labor, and Lad would always host. And what happened is I started, because Lad, because of his lung function and stuff, it was hard for him to speak. So we'd usually have about 28 guests, and I would tell that story. And then afterwards, we'd open it up for questions and answers. And so I told the story of the rough and tumble youth that had to leave the East Coast, came out here, and you've heard the story of the snorkel and the regular garden hose and all of that. And he went from knowing zero about diving to being a principal in the largest oceaneering firm in the world. That right there was astonishing. And then the fact of his charisma and his exuberance and his love for life, despite the fact that he was in a wheelchair. Lad was one of the most alive people I ever met in my life, even though, people in the old days would say he was handicapped. He was anything but handicapped. So we gave him an award one year, and it was, and he was really appreciative of that. I recognized him for his life achievements. Well, a couple of years later, I was involved, I don't even remember, Linda, what I was doing there, if I was an MC or something, that another group gave him a Heroes Award. And when he went up to that podium, he said, "This is the most important award I've ever received, the most meaningful award I ever received." So I was stupid, and I tried to parlay with Lad and said, "I thought our award was the most important award you ever had." And he says, "No, you gave me one for what I did. They gave me an award for who I am." I lost that one. Anytime I got involved with that, I lose that. So even though I've been telling his story for 15 years, and that his story of success was jaw-dropping and inspirational and just flabbergasting what this man accomplished, and like I said, the joy in his life, where he thought, this guy's had so many challenges in his life, and he's just a complete, total overcomer. Well, I thought I knew Lad's story because I told it at least a dozen times, maybe 15 times. But that night at the award that he received, he told a story I'd never heard. And this literally made Lad. So what I never heard is, we heard about him being in the Red Devils, and judge or authority telling him, better go find somewhere else to live and something else to do and different people to associate with. But what I didn't know is what happened before that. So Lad's mother had some challenges in her life, And one of the challenges is his father had left the family, so Lad was raised by his mother, but really, because his mother had some challenges, he was really raised by his grandparents, who they all lived with each other. And his grandfather suffered some debilitating thing like a stroke. And back then, you don't go, if you have any sense of pride or dignity back in that age, you don't go on welfare or aid. So they managed to bring the grandfather to bedroom, and the grandmother smothered him. And then the grandmother went to the top of the roof and jumped off. The mother came home and lost her mind instantaneously. We always heard old movies. You took her to Bellevue. They literally took her to Bellevue. Lad and his brother were alone. The dad came back for a while, but make a long story short, that was what happened before he came out here. And I was just stunned. I was absolutely stunned. Because one of the things he said about his grandmother, he said, on that day, I lost the only person who ever loved me. And what stunned me is I've never met a person that was more loved than Lad. So he went from losing the only person who ever loved him to, we could have filled this room 5 times over. And the secret, because it is a secret, he should have ended up a mental case or a drug addict or an alcoholic or something. He should have ended something, because every single thing was against him. But what he said, the phrase he said is, whenever something is, and I'm paraphrasing this, whenever something is overwhelming me, when it's against all odds, I look for a window. And I go out that window. Lad had a lot of windows in his life. He successfully made it through all of them, to the point he was one of the most beloved, successful, joyous, beautiful man I've ever had a chance to know and love. And it shamed me personally, absolutely shamed me, because I've only faced, my dad died when I was young, and I've had other things in my life that were hard. Nothing compared to what Lad went through. But I never saw him when he was not upbeat. I never saw him when he was more interested in your life and in your everything else. He was selfless. Tooting his horn. I had 6 daughters, flirted with them enough for a lifetime. It was the biggest flirt I've ever seen in my life. And they loved him, They all came to Lad's pat to work and to love on Lad. But folks, there is not a more remarkable person, I dare say, in our lives than Lad Handelman. And I will never forget him, what he represented, what he also had to overcome. And I used to think that how sad it was that his body was broken. But what a miracle that his heart that had been broken was healed. Thank you for this honor of sharing my beloved friend.
A good insight to those early days that isn't generally known. Next, I'd like to invite to the podium my friend, NASA astronaut, Mike Gernhardt.
Well, good evening. It is a pleasure to be here in hear all these things about Laddie that I didn't know. Unlike the others, I'm going to wing this, but my connection with Ladd goes all the way back to junior high school. And like most kids my age, we were fascinated with Jacques Cousteau and inspired by him. And also at the time, there was the Apollo program going on, and C-Lab and Skylab. And then I was reading about those, and I was reading about Ladd, Handelman, and oceaneering, and all these audacious things that we're doing with deep diving and technology. And at that time, I set the goal to be an astronaut by way of the ocean and to know Laddie Handelman. And so fast forward, I was a commercial diver for Ocean Systems, and I got a chance to know all these legends of the diving industry. I did a job in Santa Barbara with Whitey Steffens, and had the obligatory breakfast at Sambo's at 4 o'clock or something crazy. And then in the early 80s, or probably mid-80s, Oceaneering bought out Ocean Systems. And so I got to know Johnny Johnson and Mike Hughes, and then we did a spacesuit study, and Phil Newton got to be a really close friend. And all these guys were so absolutely amazing, and Laddie was their boss. And I was like, I need to meet this guy. And so fast forward again, I started the company Ocean Space Systems to take everything that we had learned underwater and transfer it to space. And then I got selected to be an astronaut. And then before my first flight, I was at some oceans conference, and there was a tech diving session. And Laddie was there. And he was telling off these tech divers very directly, but very professionally. And, you know, so I had this impression that Laddie was like an intimidating guy. So I went up and I introduced myself to him. And it was like I was catching up with my old best friend. I mean, he was a pussycat, and we were talking and talking and talking. And his people came to take me away, or they closed the room down or whatever. And after that, you know, we stayed friends, and he would call me out of the blue. I would always make time, no matter what I was doing, to chat with him. Before my first flight, I was going to do a spacewalk. This is probably more than you want to know, but I dislocated my shoulder right before the flight, doing something I probably should have been doing. But anyhow, it had nothing to do with alcohol. But anyhow, so I was talking to him, and he's like, you know, you just do the right thing. If you can rehab and do this flight, that's it. You know, do it. So I did it, and then I remember he would call, and I would just talk to him about spacewalks and try to get his advice. And he would say, Mike, I don't know anything about spacewalks or NASA. I said, Laddie, it's just a dive. And so I'd explain to him what we're doing. And I got lots of good ideas out of him. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched spacewalks real close, but there's a tether that you wear to keep you attached to the structure. And in space, there's no water, so it bounces around, and it inevitably gets wrapped around your neck or through your legs. And so I was asking Laddie about that, and he goes, well, can't you just put it in your hand? And so sure enough, I came up with this technique where you put the tether, the wire in your hand, and grab the handhold. So he helped me with all sorts of things like that. And then there were several times at NASA where I was looking at maybe starting my own company, and he was like, hey, I know all these venture capital guys that took Oceaneering public. I mean, he would do anything for you. And then finally, I got assigned to sort of the big diving job, which was the flight to install the airlock on the International Space Station and make the first spacewalk using this new decompression procedure that I had led the development of. And so when you have a flight, you get to invite lots of people, VIPs and stuff. And we had a pre-flight party, and I was in quarantine, but I managed to get Laddie and Mike Hughes and Johnny Johnson and Phil Newton all at that party. And that's the first time they had all seen each other, you know, probably since the dissolution, or since he formed Caldyne. Anyhow, I know they had a good time. My family was saying that Laddie was the life of the party, and I could tell from the photographs, like every pretty girl was on Laddie's lap. So that was great. And you know, throughout the rest of his life, you know, he would call. And, you know, just circling back, I remember I was actually out doing a job out here off Santa Barbara when I learned of his accident skiing. And I was profoundly affected, even though I didn't know him. I literally cried. And I was like, you know, how can this guy that's so full of life and a diver and a businessman and all this stuff have this happen to him? And what I didn't know at the time is that was just another thing he had to overcome. And anyhow, he got to be, you know, one of my best friends. I could talk to him like my dad. He'd call you out of the blue, and anyhow, I just feel lucky to have met him and honored to have been one of his friends.
And for Michael's adventures going up, next up we would like to introduce Patrick Leahy and his adventures going down. Come on up, Patrick. In the diving sense of you both.
Thanks for clarifying that there, Leslie. Yeah, so that picture of Laddie, you know, I always said he looked like the James Dean of the diving world. It's been so incredible listening to these stories and hearing these sort of heartfelt memories and thoughts that people have about Laddie. So I've got something here that I would like to read that I prepared, just because this is so important to me. I don't want to miss anything. So first I want to say it's a great honor to be here and to have the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today about Laddie Handelman. He was a maverick, an individual who, despite humble beginnings and a devastating injury, achieved a level of success and professional recognition most of us can only imagine. Laddie was a force of nature, an industry legend, and one of those rare and precious but larger-than-life characters who grace us and the world occasionally with their presence. And despite his extraordinary successes and personal challenges, he remained stoic, humble, dignified, and respectful. He always made time to listen to others and never complained. I had the great privilege and tremendous good fortune to meet Laddie when I was just 19 years old. And I was going to a commercial diving school in Los Angeles. This was about 1981, I guess. And I worked at the school as part of paying my tuition. And so on the weekends, I'd be cleaning training tanks and making up umbilicals and fixing helmets, all in an effort to help pay my tuition, but also, you know, help to enhance my knowledge of the subject matter. And on one, fortuitous day, I was there at the school, and Jim Joyner, who was the guy who ran the school, came up to me and said, "Patrick, I need you to do me a favor. I've got this VIP. You need to give him a lift to the airport." So I said, "Yeah, sure, Jim. No problem. I'd be happy to give him a lift to the airport." Anyway, so Laddie comes up, shakes my hand, gets in the car, and we set off for LAX. And on the way, we're driving along, and he takes a business card out, hands it to me, and says, "Jim tells me you're doing well at the school here. When you get out of school here, come on up and see me, and I'll get you a job." So I took his card, and I looked at it, said, didn't say anything about who he was. I had no idea who this individual was. I guess he must have been in his mid-40s at that time. And it was a fairly nondescript card. It just said, Lad Handelman, chairman. And then on the back it said, California Sea Farms. That's it. So I was like, who's this guy? California Sea Farms, What's that? Anyway, I said, thanks very much. That's great. I took the card, put it in my pocket. We kept, heading to the airport. And then my car broke down, just like within visual sight of LAX. So he gets out, closes the door, and says, "Hey, remember, if you ever get up to Santa Barbara, give me a call." He flagged the taxi, and off he went. And I never thought I'd see him again. I had, again, no idea who he was or why he was a VIP. It's interesting, Jim Joyner says, do me a favor, but actually, he did me a huge favor, because Laddie, became a pretty important person in my life. So, while I was at dive school, I met a girl, as you do, and turns out that I was going to go back to Canada. In fact, I did tell him. I said, "Look, I'm a Canadian. I'm going to go back to Newfoundland. I'm going to work on the rigs in Newfoundland." Which made it even less likely that I'd see the guy. Excuse me. Anyway, so I went out to Newfoundland, and this girl that I had met called me and said, "Geez, would you like to come back out to California?" I'm sitting there freezing my tail off in Newfoundland. It seemed pretty alluring. It turns out, she wanted to go up to Santa Barbara, and so a few months later, unexpectedly, I found myself, in Santa Barbara, and I kept his business card. So I pulled that card out. I didn't know anybody. Actually, I had a friend of mine, my roommate, was working for Oceaneering as a tender, Jim Kinsey. And so I called the number and sort of in the desperate hope that this guy would help this foreigner, this illegal alien, find a job. So I called the number and Laddie answered, and I said, "Mr. Handelman, I don't know if you remember me or not, but I met you at dive school and I gave you a lift to the, you're the guy whose car broke down." I figured at that point he'd hang up on me. But no, he said, "Yeah, I remember you. Yeah, no problem, Patrick. Are you in town?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in town." He said, "Are you looking for a job?" And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." He said, "Well, come on out to my office." And I said, "Where's your office?" It's out on Stearns Wharf. So I was kind of new into town at Stearns Wharf. Okay, I didn't know that anybody had an office out there, but okay. So I walk out there, go up the stairs. He greets me. I come in, and I don't know that anybody had offices in Stearns Wharf, but he did. And so I sat down, and he picked up the phone and dials and calls this guy Jerry Bartz. I don't know if any of you know Jerry, but. He said, well, before he picks it up, he says, "Hey, Patrick, I got a guy here who used to work for me, and he started a new business here, or he's heading up a new business here in town, and maybe he's got something for you." So he calls him up, said, "Hey, Jerry, I got this guy, he's in my office here. He did well in school, and I think he's going to be good. So give him a job, would you?" And so Jerry went ahead and said, "Okay, send him over." Wrote a little address on a piece of paper, and I headed over to 22 Anacapa Street, and IUC was the company that had just moved into town, and knocked on the door, and Jerry, a great big tall guy, greets me at the door, and said, "You Patrick?" "Yeah." And he hands me a broom, and he said, "Okay, sweep the shop." That's how my diving career got started. But it's all thanks to Laddie, who as I'll continue with my written part, which is probably a little more eloquent than my stories. So there was something about Laddie, and Sergio talked about it as well. He had this kind of uncanny ability to see things in people that they didn't see themselves. I think that was his superpower. But his decency and innate kindness, seemingly endless and impulsive generosity, is the thing that encouraged him to use the many fine qualities that he did possess to assist others like me. Laddie was quite frankly a guiding hand throughout my life, and he helped me navigate some perilous and difficult challenges as well. I'm always going to be grateful to him for his friendship, his encouragement, his wisdom. We were, all of us in this room, incredibly fortunate to have known this remarkable man. And anytime you have to make a list of all the things that someone did for you during the course of their life, they probably did too much. Laddie was, without question, one of the most generous, kind, and thoughtful people I ever encountered. The impulse to give and lend a hand to others just came naturally to him. And he made an indelible impact on the lives of a lot of people, including, I suspect, many of you in this room tonight. And it's so heartwarming to hear all of the stories, and I'm sure there are many more still to be told. The last time that I saw Laddie, we were visiting him here in Santa Barbara. In fact, even though I left Santa Barbara in the mid-'80s, I would come back reasonably often, and it was just to see him, really. I mean, that's why I came back here. And it was on this trip, I think a couple of years ago, actually it would have been 3 years ago. It was the last time that I spent any real time with him. We were visiting with him here, and he basically devoted the entire 2 days that I was here to me and to my family. And that was right after he had just fought one of those life-threatening bouts of pneumonia that he occasionally got. We toured the UCSB campus because my daughter was thinking about going to that university. And we had incredible meals, including a barbecue up at the Lads Pad. If you've ever been to one of those, they're pretty incredible. And it was really a very special time. When we were saying our goodbyes, Laddie handed me a gift, which is in my office, and something that I treasure, probably above most things that I've ever been given. It was a magnificent abalone shell, maybe the most beautiful one I've ever seen. And it was sitting on top of a plaque, and on the plaque it read, "To my most humble friend, Patrick Lackey, dreamer, builder of men and machines, explorer of what's beyond." I was quite literally rendered speechless by the gift that he handed me. And for those of you who know me, you'll know being speechless is not something that I typically do. But every day I will try to do my best to live up to that lofty message. But when I see it, I think of my great friend and mentor who did so much to help me and so many others during his remarkable and legendary life. We'll miss you, Laddie Handelman. The world is somehow a lesser place without you, but you are not and never will be forgotten. Bye for now.
I'll just add a note to Patrick that yesterday morning he was in Barcelona. So, I think our friend Ladd would be pleased that we have gathered here to remember him. And also that our diving community will ensure that Ladd and his pioneer diving colleagues are never forgotten here. All being well, within about 2 years, a few yards out that front door will be a 10-foot solid bronze statue monument to the divers of Santa Barbara. A scale statuette of what that statue will be is just there on the table in front of the lighthouse lens, and there is a card telling you a little bit about what the project is. The project was going to be, we thought, 2 years to go through city permits and processes. It got green lighted in 9 months. We have all the processes and the permits for it. So on your way up, take a look. That will honour Ladd and many of the other pioneers that created deep water diving in Santa Barbara. This now concludes this portion of the celebration, and the family would like now to invite you all to socialise the time that's left here. There in the aisle behind you, there's coffee and there's cookies. And when you all leave, if you don't all leave too soon, you will all, each family will receive one of these. This is the program that the family have asked us to put together to honour Ladd, and it's pretty impressive. As you do wind up, upstairs, the Historical Diving Society is having the Divers Reunion. You don't have to be a diver, you just have to sort of know Ladd or anyone that dives or live in town, or be able to pay your own round because it's no host bar. So you're all invited up to that. It's upstairs in the Salties and on the right wing. So on behalf of Ladd's family, I thank you for sharing this evening with us. Have a safe journey home, and in the words of Ladd and Patrick, I guess, bye for now.